Well, welcome back onto the Norfolk Broads, and we are back in the garden this morning, Friday morning, on this beautiful blue sky. Lovely, the wind's dropped down. It's still pretty cold here in Norfolk. We're only at around 8 or 9 degrees. We've got some little bits of this garden we're just going to concentrate on showing you today that are really coming into their own at this time of year. And you may like to try and reproduce some of these plantings, because at this time of year the cottage garden's just starting to really emerge and come to life again. Bluebells on the southern side of this cottage wall, just nestling in here between the step to the front door and the red brick behind, are probably around 3 weeks earlier than the native bluebell would be in woodland or somewhere more exposed. Just look at the lovely flower that's starting to emerge and just open in this morning sunlight here. Lovely planting, quite dense. The foliage tends to be quite floppy in this position. It doesn't stand upright particularly well. It's straining for the light a little bit behind these chairs and tends to form this flattened carpet on the base. But the flowers emerging through that, and absolutely gorgeous. To the side of it we've got a wild feverfew. This plant, one of my favourites, flowers later in the spring, around May time. There's a very lime green, almost bleached out version of this, which is lovely as a foliage plant and covered in white and yellow daisy-like flowers later in the season. It's enjoying a little bit of something there. You shouldn't be eating salad in my garden, Ted. Don't know what that is. I don't think it's daffodil. I think it is actually a bit of wheat or oat leaf coming through that's seeded up from the bird feeders above. And then we've got these absolutely splendid bright red tall tulip flowers. I'll try and get a view into one of these for you. Absolutely lovely centres, really popping in the morning sunlight here. There's a further area of them just in front of the dining room window here, again popping with more feverfew that's just naturally seeded along the base of this planting. We've then got the rosemary, again just loves the baking that it gets here on this southern aspect, and some roses just starting to emerge now. Lovely fresh spring foliage coming through on these. Just look at the colour on this new growth, almost as worth growing for as the flowers later in the season, just to get this emerging red. The stems and leaf just beautiful copper red and orange, beautiful. The petals dropping off these camellias, forming a carpet under here. Very pretty in this dappled shade. And then some perennial little forget-me-not, just peppering along this little area. This is where we started to fight the ground elder that we have got in here, and we still need to do a bit of picking over on this border to try and get the rest of that out. Some daylily coming up at the back there, lovely fresh foliage growth. And then this is all shaded under this shrub that's just flowering away nicely above it. And just on the other aspect of this border, more forget-me-nots. And again, a little planting just to pick the light up on the end here. About to emerge, this beautiful tall white tulip. This has actually been planted through another bulb that we have flowering here at the end of the season in the autumn. These are nerines at this time of year are just putting their leaf up to strengthen the bulbs, and it's a good job for the weekend now to actually put some feed down at this stage while the soil's still moist, just to start all of those back into establishing some strength. And it's a good idea to also put some feed down for your tulip bulbs while they're growing away like this with good leaf on them. That will encourage good strong bulbs and another set of beautiful flowering tulips next year. These camellias have been spectacular this year, but they have been damaged by some very late strong frosts that we've had overnight. We've had high pressure here now for about 2.5 weeks on and off, and that means hard air and ground frosts. So we've had a lot of browning off on these, but the majority in this little sheltered area have survived, and there's still plenty of bud coming on this plant. There's one that's just suffering from some frost damage, but plenty more to replace that, and hopefully this camellia will go on flowering here for a good number of weeks to come. Another plant that's been suffering from the air frosts is our magnolias, and this stellata. I'm glad I managed to film this for you last weekend before it suffered the worst of the frosts. It's coming towards the end of its flowering season now, but you can see the browning off that we've got on these buds. This is quite typical of cold overnight temperatures, particularly susceptible if they then get the morning sunlight on the frost. That tends to be almost a killer combination. So positioning these plants in a little bit of a sheltered position where they don't get the very first of the morning sun can sometimes avoid the worst of this occurring. Some years you'll get away with it, other years the flowering is just decimated by it. One plant that isn't bothered about overnight frosts are these Hellebores. I've shown you this plant before and it's just getting better and better. More and more flower coming to the fore. This is a crown of this lovely deep red purple hellebore that's probably around 3 foot across. If I just draw back the impact even from a distance on this, which you don't usually get with these red hellebores, you do with the whites once they get to this size, but this one with the sunlight just coming through it, absolutely beautiful plant. One we'd like to try and get more going from the seedlings and the young plants that we've got coming up around this. You'll see in this gravel we've got quite a few seedlings. Quite difficult to get them up unless you do so at a very early stage. The crown we could lift and divide, but absolutely the display on this really prevents us wanting to do that. We just love it here, and I think if anything I'm going to try lifting some of these more smaller peripheral plants and growing those on to see if we can reproduce this planting elsewhere. We popped quite a few pots of muscari in at the back of this little lavender border last year, and they've come on quite well, but I'm just wondering whether we should move these further out and into a more sun exposed area. They do like full sunlight. We've got some over here in the border on the other side of the gravel driveway, planted between some anemones that we'd completely forgotten we'd planted here, and these are much happier, more exposed at this time of year, interspersed with some Egyptian iris, flag iris and Cicerynchiums in this planting under this quite overgrown hawthorn hedge above it. Very little gets growing at the back under the canopy and shade of this, but along the front these irises and spring bulbs really do quite well. So we might move some of those into this area where we've got gaps to give us a bit more impact along the length of this border next spring.